Integrating Samael, returning to majesty. Communication is one of humanity's greatest gifts. Through words we share ideas, through listening we discover understanding. Through honest dialogue we build trust, relationships, and community. Yet communication becomes distorted whenever it begins serving identity instead of truth. Some silence themselves through fear, others speak only to defend themselves. Though these expressions appear opposite, they arise from the same fragmentation. One fears expression, the other becomes attached to expression. Neither fully embodies Hod. Integration begins when communication no longer seeks to protect the self. Instead, it becomes an expression of truth, humility, and understanding. Words cease becoming instruments of control, they become bridges between minds. Listening becomes as valuable as speaking. Truth becomes something to embody rather than something to defend. This is the restoration of Hod, not silence, not domination, but communication in service of understanding. Healing repression. When authentic communication is suppressed, the individual gradually loses confidence in their own voice. Thoughts remain unspoken, boundaries remain undefined, needs remain hidden. The desire to preserve peace quietly replaces honesty. Yet silence cannot create genuine understanding when truth remains unexpressed. Healing begins by remembering that authentic communication is not selfish, it is an act of trust. Relationships cannot grow through the concealment of reality, they deepen through honest expression. Practices. Practice expressing one honest truth each day, even if it feels uncomfortable. Speak from your own experience rather than from assumption. Use phrases such as, "This is how I feel, this is what I have experienced." Practice setting healthy boundaries without guilt. When something needs to be said, speak with kindness rather than avoidance. Allow vulnerability to become an expression of courage rather than weakness. Remember that honesty offered with compassion strengthens relationship. It does not weaken it. Healing possession. When communication becomes possessed, words begin serving the ego rather than truth. The individual feels compelled to be right, to persuade, to defend, to control the direction of every conversation. Listening gradually disappears. Understanding becomes secondary to winning. Healing begins by remembering that truth does not require defense. Only the ego does. The purpose of communication is not to conquer another perspective. It is to understand the reality together. Practices. Practice listening without preparing your response. Become curious before becoming certain. Ask questions before offering conclusions. When disagreement arises, pause before speaking. Allow silence to become part of the conversation. Practice saying, "I may be mistaken. Help me understand your perspective." Notice the impulse to interrupt, persuade, or defend. Rather than acting upon it, return your attention to listening. Humility creates space for truth to emerge naturally. Integration. As both extremes gradually soften, communication begins to transform. Truth is no longer hidden, neither is it weaponized. It is expressed with humility. Listening becomes as meaningful as speaking. Conversations become opportunities for discovery rather than competition. Disagreement no longer threatens identity. It becomes an invitation to deeper understanding. Words are chosen more carefully, not because they are feared, but because they are valued. Communication becomes an act of service. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to strengthen relationship rather than defend the self. This is the return of Hod, truth expressed with humility, wisdom expressed through relationship, communication rooted in understanding. Recognition. As Samael begins to integrate, subtle changes naturally appear. You become more willing to listen than to persuade. You become more comfortable saying, "I don't know." Defensiveness gradually softens. Curiosity begins replacing certainty. You speak more honestly without becoming harsh. You become increasingly willing to have difficult conversations rather than avoiding them. Silence no longer comes from fear. Speech no longer comes from ego. Communication becomes increasingly authentic. People begin feeling heard in your presence, not because you always agree, but because you genuinely seek to understand. These are signs that Hod is becoming embodied. Living expression. As Hod becomes integrated, communication becomes one of your greatest expressions of service. Your words become thoughtful rather than reactive. Your listening becomes generous rather than selective. People experience safety because they feel genuinely received. Relationships deepen through honesty. Conflict becomes an opportunity for growth rather than division. Teaching becomes an act of sharing rather than proving. Leadership becomes an act of listening rather than controlling. The quality of your communication quietly transforms the quality of every relationship in your life. Truth no longer divides, it unites. Not because everyone agrees, but because everyone has been seen, heard, and respected. This is the living expression of Hod: communication in service of truth, communication in service of love, communication in service of understanding. Reflection. Take a quiet moment to reflect upon your communication. Ask yourself, which expression of Samael has shaped my life more deeply, repression or possession? Which practices speak most directly to where I am today? What truths am I ready to express with greater honesty? Where can I become a better listener? When do I speak to protect my identity rather than to reveal truth? How can my words become an expression of humility, compassion, and understanding? What would change if every conversation became an opportunity to learn rather than to win? Every meaningful relationship is built one conversation at a time. When communication becomes aligned with truth, humility, and love, it ceases to separate, it begins to unite.